The following is a presentation from TNTP. If your school or district is interested in direct support related to the content of this session, or if you have any questions, please contact us by emailing maya.baker@tntp.org or christopher.henderson@tntp.org. You can find us online at www.tntp.org or on Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn. Now, please enjoy the session.
Hello everyone and welcome. This is our first session of 4 in the science of reading. Today the topic is phonological awareness and phonics. I'm really excited to be here with you. Today we're diving into phonological and awareness phonics, but throughout the next few weeks we will be having other series that you can watch and listen to as well. Those sessions are knowledge and vocabulary, comprehension, really focusing on that text complexity, and then wrapping us up is the analyzing and responding to data and foundational literacy session. This will give us the opportunity to fully dig into the science of reading. We're so excited that you're here, and hopefully you will enjoy all 4 of the sessions. On our team, we have 3 people. I'll start with my introduction. I'm Kenna McWhorter. Then on the team, we also have Caitlin McDermott and Namisha Thakur. Throughout the 4 series, you'll be hearing from all of us. But today, like I said, you'll be hearing primarily from me, but the session was created with all 3 of us. So even though it's my voice you'll hear, you'll be learning from all of us. All right. By engaging in the learning today, we move towards our goal that teachers will begin to explore what cognitive science tells us about how students learn to read. Teachers will walk away understanding the science of reading, the what and why behind phonological awareness. Phonics instruction teaches students the predictable relationship between sounds and spelling patterns, and that students need ample time to practice newly acquired phonics skills both in and out of context. All right, so with our agenda, we're going to start with discussing science of reading. Go ahead and take a second to look at this graphic. I want you to think about this question. What does this tell us about students? So from this graphic, we can see that about 35 to 40% of students will learn to read with relatively little instruction and few repetitions of phonics skills. Another 40 to 50% of students need systematic, explicit, sequential instruction in how the code of English works to help them build neural pathways between the visual, auditory areas of the brain. About 10 to 15 students require systematic, sequential instruction in phonics and phonemic awareness, but with lots and lots of repetition. These students we would consider dyslexic. It's really important to note here that dyslexic doesn't mean that these students can't learn to read, but that they need more intensive and purposeful repetition. There are some kids who are trisexceptional. For example, they may have dyslexic tendencies with something else. So with that, the number is really less, but realistically, 95% of the scholars should be reading well with strong instruction. The scholars that are the twice exceptional may just need extra support. The bottom line, this is not a question of students' ability. It is a question of instruction, and systematic, explicit instruction in phonemic awareness, phonics, and word recognition is the approach that best supports the learning of all students. This doesn't mean that teaching reading is simple, nor is learning to read for a large number of our students. It does mean that we can improve students' options in life by being the best teachers possible of learning to read, aka foundational reading instruction. And we do that based on what works, not by what we have always done or by what seems like it should work. But it doesn't have the research or data to break it up. I know I've heard teachers say, well, this is how I do it. My kids aren't mastering it, but this is what I've always done. And to me, what we should always do, and not even to me, to every researcher, every organization, we should always use research to guide us. Here at TNTP, we use the science of reading to guide us. Go ahead and look at this quote. What the science of reading is and is not. The science of reading is not an ideology, a philosophy, a political agenda, a one-size-fits-all approach, a program of instruction, or specific component of instruction. It is the emerging It is the emerging consensus from many related disciplines based on literally thousands of studies supported by hundreds of millions of research dollars conducted across the world in many languages. These studies have revealed a great deal about how we learn to read, what goes wrong when students don't learn, and what kind of instruction is most likely to work the best for the most students. Right, go ahead and read that one more time. Pause the video and discuss with your peers what is standing out from you from this quote. All right, go ahead and pause now. Great, hopefully you had some great discussion. I think something that really stands out to me is that the very beginning is it says it's not a philosophy, it's not a political agenda, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And then while you're reading, you're really reading that it is based on research. So this isn't one person that's saying my program is great. This is really focusing on the science aspect. All right, so in 1986, Go and Turner published a theory we call the simple view of reading. It tells us that the amount of words that one can decode multiplied by the amount of language they understand equals reading comprehension. This is called the simple view of reading. So it's simple, right? Without decoding, if it's a factor of 0, the product is 0. Same with language comprehension. No language comprehension. I can decode or sound out Hungarian, but I can't understand it. I know a few phrases in Chinese, but I can't read them off the page because I can't read Chinese characters. So ultimately, I can't read Hungarian, or I can't comprehend Hungarian or Chinese. Even though I can do a bit in both languages, I still can't comprehend anything in either language. Usually we're not in a cancel out situation, but when the factor is low, you're going to have low comprehension overall. Overall, the key thing here is that low decoding can never be completely compensated. It can never be completely compensated for. Reading comprehension will suffer. I wanted to show this because, as you saw from the objectives today, we are diving into the aspects of phonics, while later in our series, we're learning about language comprehension with the overall goal to impact students' reading comprehension. So the simple view of reading, the simple view is really useful, but it doesn't help us get granular at what goes into decoding and language comprehension. So we'll use this comprehensive model. Scarborough created this visual in the early 2000s to show how various skills in literacy develop over time. First, the skills develop individually, and then they interact with another. I want you to think, what ideas does this model convey about the process of becoming a reader? Go ahead, think about that question. What ideas does this model convey about the process of becoming a reader? Then go ahead and pause and discuss with your peers. All right, so as you can see, these are two main parts, word recognition and language comprehension, which correspond with the key components of the simple view. But each of these components consists of several more specific strands/skills that students need to master to become proficient readers. So what happens if you have one component but not the other? This is another way that we can see how the strands depend on each other. There are a lot fewer of these than we might think. When researchers look more closely, often what they find is that students aren't really as fluent readers as we think. And working on the word recognition skills will improve their overall comprehension. For today, we're focusing on reading foundational skills, which are the components in the green, word recognition. It's important to keep in mind while we're working on this in isolation that not all there is to reading. That's not all there is to reading, but it is a major part of new learning in K through 2 and continues to be submitted in 3rd grade and beyond. And because it makes such a huge difference in twining the ropes, it's going to be our focus. All right, so zooming in on word recognition. In the rope that we saw in the slide before, it illustrates the research is clear about how the connection between phonics instruction and comprehension. Before we jump in deeper to the brain science, let's pause and really pull apart the word recognition. All right, so while we're doing this, we'll address some key terms that will help us make better sense of brain science. Let's get inside our heads now to make more sense of the process. So, phonological awareness supports student understanding that words are made up of a series of discrete sounds. Phonics teaches students how to map sounds into letters and spellings. The more phonics students learn, the better they are able to decode and sound out words efficiently, and they begin to build word recognition. When students begin to recognize many words automatically, their reading starts to feel more and more effortless. This process is called orthographic mapping. So you can see how we start with just the sounds, then we connect those sounds with letters and start building that spelling. Then because we now know the sounds and what connects the letters, we're able to decode, which allows our word recognition, which then leads into automatic reading to the final process, well, not final, but to the process of orthographic mapping. Then, once we get to that orthographic mapping, we get to fluency, or reading accurately and smoothly. It is partly a byproduct of orthographic mapping. As sentences become more complex, students need to get through enough words fast enough to make sense of what they are reading. All right, so we also talked about the importance of instruction that reinforces the brain building that has to happen. First, being able to recognize single sounds and learning letters shapes that represent them. To start reading, students need to deeply solidify the letter-sound relationship and learn lots of them. Since there are 44 sounds and at last 150 ways to spell them, and then with more and more practice and repetition, building new pathways in the brain that efficiently connect from the visual to the meaning, enabling reading to be fluent. All right, so with effective reading instruction, the first thing children must be able to do is learn letter names and letter sounds. From there, children then combine letter sound knowledge with phonological blending to sound out unfamiliar words. And finally, we get to that orthographic mapping. Children efficiently expand their sight vocabularies. So now I want you to pause the camera, and with a group of 3, I want one person to start to describe the process of how we learn to read. Then the second person will add on anything that the original definition is missing, and the third person will do the same to close out the definition. Right, this should take you about 3 to 4 minutes to complete, and then come back and unpause the video when you're ready. All right, so now that we've been able to dive into the science of reading, and I know all of you nailed it with your definition of strong sight, of being able to define very strongly how we learn to read, which is grounded in the science of reading for us. Now we'll move on to phonological awareness. We're going to start by defining some terms that may be new to you and have many similar words parts, which can make it kind of confusing. All right, so we're going to start with phonological awareness. Phonological awareness is the ability to reflect on and manipulate component sounds of spoken words. This would be like rhymes and syllables. Phonemic awareness is a particular type of phonological awareness. The ability to reflect on and manipulate phonemes in a spoken word. Remember, phonemes is an individual sound. And finally, we get to phonics, which is the system of the sounds in spoken language that's represented by the letters in printed language. A way that I remember the difference between phonological awareness versus phonics is the light bulb. Phonological awareness is all with sound, so you don't need light to be able to practice phonological awareness. However, with phonics, you are actually using the letters, so you need to be able to see to practice phonics. Students need phonemic awareness in order to use phonics for reading. But there are many sub-skills. Phonological awareness is our umbrella, and these skills fall under it. These progress from easier to most challenging. Remember, all involve sound, not print. Though at the highest levels, most likely you'll start to involve print. Note that being able to take words apart and put back together to make words is the most challenging. This doesn't mean that students need to master any one of these in order to move forward. and you can work at different levels at the same time. So on rhyming, you may be able to, at first, just say, does this rhyme, does this not? And then once they're able to do that, now you can start having them create their own words while you're moving on to that sentence segmentation and even some syllable segmentation and blending. All right, so an example of each. For rhyme, if I'm the teacher, I could say, I'm going to give you 3 words. Tell me which ones rhyme. King, queen, sing. And the student says, king, sing. Very good. Now we're going to end the scene and move to the next scene of sentence segmentation. So with sentence segmentation, the teacher will say, I'm going to say a sentence. I want you to count the words. The king is going to the castle. And the students would say, the king is going to the castle. The king is going to the castle. 7 words. Great. All right, so then syllable segmentation and blending. Clap the syllables. Remember that every time your mouth drops, clap a syllable. Imagination. 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 5. Great. I'm going to give you the syllable slowly. Tell me the word fast. Candle. And the student says, candle. All right, so you saw the difference between segmentation and then blending. All right, onset, rhyme, blending, and segmentation. I'm going to say the first part of the word and the end part of the word. You put them together. King. King. Take off the first sound and say it with the rest of the word. King. And the student would say, ing. All right, so then we get to phoneme blending and segmentation. How many sounds in king? Ing. 3. Add a s to the word kings. Oh, sorry, I messed up my own directions. Add a s to the word king. And then the student would say kings. Change the ng sound to s. The kid would say s. And those are examples of the phonemic awareness in each part of the overall umbrella. There's our umbrella that shows us the phonological awareness. And to break down some of those skills, we have blending, isolating, final, and middle sounds, segmenting, adding, deleting, and substituting. All right, so these 4 practices must be in our instruction. As we move to the best practice for phonological awareness teaching, let's get concrete about what that means. Systematic. You follow the ladder. If kids don't have it at the end of grade 2, provide more practice. Explicit. Don't make the students guess what you're doing and why you're doing. Say what you're doing, show it, do it together, then practice. Practice. Give a lot of repetitions to move towards mastery. We know that many students need many repetitions to get it. And then make sure that we're giving that feedback in the moment, listening for errors and prompting for corrections as needed. Corrective feedback in the moment is one of the most missed opportunities in phonemic awareness instruction. We don't want scholars to be practicing something incorrectly. So when you see that they're not blending something correctly, or they're not breaking apart something correctly, or they're missing a rhyme, give them that corrective feedback in the moment. In our fourth session that we have throughout this series, we'll talk more about what corrective feedback in the moment is and what it looks like in foundational skills. All right, so now we're going to practice a teacher move to the previous slide. I'm going to read the part of the lesson, and you're going to tell me if it's systematic, explicit, practice, or assessment-driven instruction. All right, so you tell students what and why. You reinforce skills with manipulative or kinesthetic movement. What do you think that is? Great, I heard it. You said explicit. All right, so the second thing, when you have a struggling reader, assesses their phonemic awareness using a test that is sensitive enough to reveal issues with higher level phonemic awareness. What's that? You're right, it is assessment drives instruction. All right, you provide multiple at-bats. Students will need up to 6 to 8 weeks with a new skill until it becomes automatic. That is practice. In kindergarten and grade 1, follow the ladder of phonological skills and spend most time on phoneme manipulation, blending, segmenting, adding, deleting, and substituting. Crucial for reading and writing. Don't stop at blending and segmenting. In grades 2, continue building phonological awareness, but tied to print. Phonics activities will reinforce and strengthen phonemic awareness. That is systematic. Great, so you did a great job practicing matching teacher moves and making sure that you know what teacher move goes along with systematic, explicit practice and assessment drives instruction. All right, so here we have a teacher who is teaching in a program called Haggerty. This program is a phonemic awareness only program. You can watch the video and watch only the first about 10 minutes. In this video, I want you to see how the teacher uses this curriculum with students who need further support to develop and solidify their phonemic awareness. This video was actually made as part of the support they created during spring 2020 closures to show families and teachers how it could be taught asynchronously. While you are watching, I want you to look for specific parts of those lessons to see if she follows parts of the structure and what content she is teaching. So I want you to look for, is it systematic, is it explicit, are there times for practice, and then if there's any assessment drives instruction, if there's any feedback or probing to feedback. So then once you watch the video, I want you to discuss on what you saw and making sure that you're using the right terminology, not only for the phonemic awareness umbrella, like all the rhyming, sentence segmentation, but also you're using the word systematic, explicit while you're talking about those things. So go ahead, pause this and watch the video from about 2 minutes to about 5 minutes when she begins and moves on to the phonics word. All right, so hopefully watching that video was helpful. You might usually be eager to jump right into talking about phonics because we want children to read. They need to be looking at words, right? But not so fast. I want you to read this quote, and then I want you to discuss why it's important for us to really think through our strong phonemic awareness teaching before we move straight to phonics. Go ahead and read this. Pause the video for that discussion. All right, so hopefully that was a good discussion. For students to be able to decode or sound out words, they need to be able to hear how individual sounds make up words. The readers who fall behind, they tend to read less, have fewer exposures to print, and are less likely to memorize large number of words, further falling behind their peers. So remember, phonemic awareness and alphabet recognition are two best predictors of early reading success and must be addressed for phonics instruction to work. All right, so this has been a lot. I want you to go ahead and silently reflect for 2 minutes on these questions. Then, once everyone has silently reflect, go ahead and have 2 minutes for sharing out. Right, so again, you're going to pause the video and you're going to let everyone reflect independently. Then you're going to bring them back together for the discussion. And once you have that discussion done, then you'll come back and unpause the video. All right, so now that we've already discussed the science of reading and phonological awareness, the last thing we're going to do is really pushing that phonics from the basics to advance. So moving from phonological awareness now to phonics, here's where we are talking about really building that level 2 of reading where students are combining their letter sounds knowledge, holding those sounds in their memory to blend them, and ultimately sounding out those words. Again, to be effective teachers of phonics, we must be systematic, explicit, provide practice, and use assessment. Systematic, explicit, provide practice, and use assessment. The goal is accurate and automatic recognition of letters, which leads to accurate automatic recognition of words, which eventually leads to accurate and automatic recognition of all words in a sentence, which will then lead to accurate and automatic recognition of a story. All right. So who tends to get by with just a little explicit instruction and practice? Students who typically need less explicit instruction are read to more and get lots of talk about letters and letters sounds as part of that experience. They spend lots of time pretending reading books, tend to read favorites multiple times, have access to preschools that expose them phonological awareness and early reading activities, have a wider range of general knowledge when entering school than maybe preschool or books or past experience, possess a wider ranging vocabulary entering school, spend less time on screens. It's very important for the 2021 year that we're in, and get frequent enrichment opportunities and have access to tutoring as needed. So we know that there's a combination of factors that come into play, including the brain's hardwiring, a children's environment. What is most clear is that there's no correlation between their IQ, and the speed at which a student learns to read. Again, this is not a question of ability, it is a question of instruction. It's also a question of equity. This chart that we just walked through is adapted from Know Better, Do Better by David and Meredith Libin. It outlines some of the characteristics of students who typically get by with less explicit phonics instruction and practice. I'm going to ask you to look at this chart and focus not only on the characteristics, but also about access. As you read, think who has the most access to the tools that build these characteristics. So again, go ahead and look at the chart again and focus not only on the characteristics, but also about access. So when you're done, you'll discuss who has the most access to these tools that build these characteristics. And then I want you to reflect on the connection between equity and explicit phonics instruction. You'll do this in a small group, and then you can share out whole groups. So again, you're going to reflect on the connections between equity and explicit phonics instruction. And when you're done, you'll go ahead and come back and unpause the video. Sorry, y'all. Okay. So again, we're going to focus on 3 overall essential elements of Tier 1 foundational skills of phonics. We know that last year is assessments, and we will actually have a whole session on foundational skills assessment, which will be our 4th session. So with that, we're really just going to focus on the Tier 1 foundational skills instruction, which is starting with systematic. The instruction is systematic, that it follows an intentional research-based progression. I think that research-based is really important, and you also have to make sure whatever curriculum you're using, you look into the research that is cited in their curriculum. Explicit. That the instruction is explicit with opportunities for students to read, write, hear, and say. And finally, that the instruction includes practice in text, including making meaning of what is read. Currently, the phonics system that I was using while I was a teacher, and now using in my current role, I see that it's systematic and it's explicit, but the practice is not extended enough for all scholars to master. It's enough practice for that very first group. If you think back to our slide with the ladder of scholars, of how many scholars can easily learn to read without practice, that our curriculum hits that really well. So we have had to really think about how we embed that multiple at-bats in a meaningful way. So just because you may like parts of your curriculum, you need to go back and look and examine to make sure all 3 is there. Now, if you have the funds and something's not there, you can just look for a program with all 3. But funds are tight, so right now we are adapting and really making sure that practice comes alive. So through the rest of the session, we're going to take a closer look at each of these elements, including research for why these matter for students. We'll start by watching a short clip of foundational skills instruction in action to see if we can identify what makes instruction systematic, explicit, and full of practice in action. All right. So we're going to take a look at Ms. Cumo's first grade classroom. I'm so excited to share this video with you. It is a strong example of teaching foundational skills. Watching this video was one of my first aha moments of what it really meant to teach students how to read. So I want you to watch the first 7 minutes. I want you to think through, while you're watching, I want you to not think through. I want you to jot down evidence of systematic, explicit instruction with lots of opportunities for practice. So every time you see that, I want you to think and jot those things down. So go ahead, pause this video, watch it, and then discuss for about 5 minutes. All right, so hopefully you enjoyed the video and you were able to see lots of strong evidence of systematic, explicit instruction with opportunities for practice. Some things I noticed is that she does a great job of connecting to past learning. There's strong sequencing. You can see evidence that kids are learning phonemic awareness and connecting to phonics as she talks about different spelling patterns. There's explicit instruction and modeling with verbal cues, so the shape of the mouth. There's opportunities for all students to practice. Students feel success, which is motivating anytime you feel that success. Teachers monitoring student understanding and providing useful feedback when a student makes a mistake. And the teacher's already anticipating misunderstandings. I'm sure a lot of those reflections I just had were part of your discussion. So hopefully viewing this was helpful. All right, so let's start to talk about what we mean by systematic phonics instruction. We saw from that previous video that the teacher was following a sequence not only because she explained students' previous work, but she also made connections for students to help them grasp the new IE spelling pattern. The National Reading Panel was recently convened to settle the debate about whole language, where students focus on memorizing words and meanings in systematic phonics instruction. So sorry, just had to grab some water. All right, so what the panel found was the systematic phonics instruction conclusively provides benefits for students' ability to read and comprehend, especially to those who are having difficulty. It was so conclusive that the Institute of Education Sciences has stopped funding research on the topic. By systematic, we mean instruction that follows an intentional sequence of explicit instruction building from easy to more complex skills with intentional opportunities for repetition and review. Just a note that not all scopes and sequences are systematic. You will need to be picking out the phonics by the book rather than a scope of least to more complex. That would be one example. All right, so what's the value of a systematic scope and sequence? I want you to look, if you just decide, okay, these are the 5 letters I'm going to teach on top. What's the benefit of these 5 words above or below? Yeah, right, with the first ones, you're able to teach the letters and the sounds, but you're not actually able to go further than that because you can't teach any sort of blending or connection of adding letters together, where in the series below, SMATD, you can actually create a lot of words. That's a strong foundation. Those are also the most common letters. So when scholars are able to start with that, when you're adding on new letters, they already have that really strong foundation. And then it's not just learning to recognize a letter and a sound in isolation, but you're actually able to talk about if you start with A and T, and then you add an N, you can now sound out at, am, mat, tam, if you're doing some nonsense words. And then when you add in that S&D, you have sad, mad, tad, right? You're adding in so much more, so they're getting actual practice with what they're learning. All right. So we know that phonics instruction needs to be systematic. It also needs to be explicit. Explicit means that every student from K to 2 classroom should be engaged with foundational skills instruction practice. Should be at least 30 minutes, but really a lot of research is saying 45 minutes to an hour. That means that at least for 30 minutes with one small group of a 5-day rotation just isn't enough. The best foundational skills program includes whole group, small group, and independent work with these skills. Also really important to note that the independent work is just not worksheets. It is also time for them to independently read and practice the sound that they're working on. Explicit instruction means that students have the opportunity to hear, say, read, and write a new spelling sound pattern during the lesson. We know that they have learned that sound and spelling they encounter in the text and produce the sound accurately and when spelling a word. So when you hear it, say several words with the targeted sound. Ask students to identify the words that contain it. For example, if you hear E and you know it, clap your hands. Let's try it. Dog. B. The kids would clap. Jump. Jeep. Book. So that's hearing it. Then you go to say it. In say it, you explain how sound is made. You may have a mouth position, you may have it voiced, stop, or continuous. So you want to make sure you're showing that if it's a continuous sound. Then you have them mimic the sound. Students can watch each other's mouth and use a hand mirror. Ask students to generate words with the sound. There are many ways to do this. Blending individual phonemes into words, segmenting words into individual phonemes are both important instructional routines. So the teacher would say, blend these sounds. Eat. And the students would say, eat, feet. All right, so then when you say it multiple ways, then you move to read it. You model how the sound is spelled. Then students should read with the targeted sound in and out of context, in and out of sentences using the target sound and reinforcing previously taught sounds. And then writing it. Students can air write, complete worksheet, dictation, and writing sentences. This is how you should go through every sound, going with the hear it, say it, read it, spell it, / write it method. All right, so practice. Making sure that you have ample opportunities for practice both in and out of context. So there's an appropriate time for worksheets, and the worksheets need to be directly aligned with the skill. So here you can tell that they're learning the I-E sound. So scholars are practicing adding the I-E to words. So from here, then you would have them actually practice once they've filled out the worksheet and completed it. You would have them practice pen, pine, and practicing that decoding all the way through. This is out of context, but then in context, you have a decodable passage where they're practicing that IE, and then you also see that they're practicing the AE with the EE, so they're really working on that long vowel. Right, then another type of practice is that students are applying their newly acquired skills to text. The key is that students need to practice their newly acquired foundational skills in a controlled text that requires them to decode, not just rely on patterns and pictures. A phonetically controlled or decodable reader has fewer pictures and less predictable text than other readers for young students. Since the intent is to ask children to attend carefully to the patterns that they have been learning. This is a sample text connected to a K lesson. Students have been working on digraphs and have just been introduced to the sound spelling pattern. You can see this text is intentionally designed to have students practice and apply the sound spelling patterns they have learned. The text also provides review of prior skills and repetition with new and prior skills. Listening to students read decodable text provides valuable information about their mastery of targeted skills. If students have not mastered the skill, they will need additional practice. Teachers often use small group time centers and transition moments to have students practice with these type of readers. So let's talk about predictable text and decodable text and how they are fundamentally different. Take a second to read both of these stories. All right, so what's the difference? Think about it. And go ahead and pause the video and discuss with your peers or reflect on your own if you're watching this by yourself about what's the difference that you see between the two. Predictable text is on the left and decodable text are on the right. Go ahead and talk about it for about a minute to 2 minutes. All right, so coming back together, you can see that some approaches, especially many balanced literacy programs, rely on predictable text to get students reading. These are fundamentally different from decodable readers that students should have the opportunity to practice with. So, I asked you a second ago to look at the level of the predictable text on the left and then compare that with the decodable text on the right. What did you notice? So you probably have already talked about this, but some key ideas that I was able to pull out, and I'm sure you were able to add to my list, but predictable text relies on the pattern with a lot of sight words that students are expected to memorize. My garden has. The pictures are predictable texts are detailed to help students fill in any missing words. So you can see my garden has seeds, and then they add birds. And then you also have sun and water. Decodable texts emphasize specific phonemes that students have already been taught and emphasize phonemes that students have just learned. The pictures in the decodable text doesn't give a lot of specific information related to the words in the text. Text 1 is from reading A to Z. It's a level text. It is listed as a Phonics and Phonological level C, placing it in the mid to end kinder range according to F&P grade level requirements. Text 2 is from CKLA's Skills Program for K, Unit 7, placing it to mid to end K. So what's the bottom line? Level texts do not support students' foundational skills like decodables do. Again, leveled predictable texts have heavy use of high frequency word. It relies on repetition. It often relies on pictures for meaning. Often those pictures are words that kids cannot decode yet. If you're at a level C, you probably cannot yet decode the word water, but you can decode sun. In the Decodable, all of those words that are in there are current sounds and spelling patterns, or they're previously taught sound and spelling patterns, so it's relying on kids to constantly go back in their brain and practice what they've already been taught. It does not rely heavily on pictures, context, or repetition. And again, one of the biggest things is that leveled text, many of the words aren't decodable, so it's teaching a skill to use a picture when we know as scholars progress through their reading ability, there's less and less pictures. So if they're using that picture to help them read, we know the harder the text, the less pictures and the less support they'll have through that. So really getting to a point that scholars aren't relying on pictures or context, and they're really able to use the spelling patterns that they're currently working on and they've been taught, will ensure that the scholars are able to read more authentically and automatically. And something that sometimes people say is that, well, Decodable is great, but it doesn't help with any scholars being able to comprehend. I would say that's not true, because students should also make meaning from the decodable text, but you're not going to overdo it. So this text, Seth's dad, this is Ted. Ted is Seth's dad. Ted is strong. So you can ask, who's the main character? What did he do during the story? What do we know about Seth's dad? What we're not going to do is go really deep of what's the main idea or theme of this book. Can you compare and contrast Seth from the character from yesterday's book? And can you provide evidence that Ted is strong? These texts aren't meant for close reading, but that doesn't mean that students can't practice making sense of what they're reading with brief questioning from the teacher. Students usually feel very proud of making sense from what they're reading, so they'll enjoy it even if the text and questions feel simple. All right, and so that takes us to our reflection. So I know we went through that, and that was a lot of things, but I want us to wrap up with reflecting by ourselves, and then you'll share it with the people around you. So the same thing we did with our previous reflection, you'll reflect for 2 minutes individually, then you can share out, and then you'll come back to the video. All right, so thank you so much for watching this video with us. We appreciate you all being here. If you have any specific questions or want suggestions or have comments and you want to follow up, Abby is a great resource for you. Her address is right there, and she can also connect you with myself and the other TNTP staff. Again, I really appreciate your time. I hope this was helpful to go through the phonemic awareness and phonics and really talk about how this can look in actual practice as you're teaching. And remember, systematic, explicit, practice, and assessment, and you'll just do great with those 4 things. All right, thanks guys.
If your school or district is interested in direct support related to the content of this session, or if you have any questions, please contact TNTP by emailing maya.baker@tntp.org or christopher.henderson@tntp.org. You can also visit us online at tntp.org or find us on Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn.